Welcome to A Matter of Perspective with Judge Derwin Webb. Obviously, I'm Judge Derwin Webb, coming to you from the Fraser History Museum. Today, we have our special guest, my main man, Mr. David Tandy. Mr. Tandy, welcome to the show.
Judge, always a pleasure to be with you.
Man, I've been doing some research on you. I've been knowing you for a long time, but I never really took the time to research who you are. We have a similar background. You're a former student athlete, played in high school, played in college. Let me ask you this. What made you decide to go into politics, though? Because you have a background that's similar to mine, but we both love politics. What made you get interested in politics?
So for me, it basically started in 1984 when Jesse Jackson ran for president. The very first time. I remember being in my living room in Owensboro, Kentucky, and watching the convention with my mom and dad. And to see an African-American man standing on that stage, and even though he didn't, win the nomination that year, but for him to be there and to articulate his message and his vision for what he saw America and what he thought it could be, that was something that it lit the fire. And then after that, it started me to get involved with other types of political small p activities. So it was everything from running for student council or class president or things like that. And then as I kept continuing to go on with it, and then also participating in youth and government programs, I'm a product of the Kentucky YMCA's, KYA, which is Kentucky Youth Assembly, or KUNA, the Kentucky United Nations Assembly, which, as a side note, I was the second African American ever to be elected to the highest office of that position, of that conference, which was, at that time they called it President of the General Assembly. And the Kentucky United Nations Assembly is a model UN. Interestingly enough, the first African American who was elected president of the General Assembly was Raul Cunningham.
Okay, all right.
And this was all during the time when Raul was leading the protest at the Brown. They actually had the conference at the Silbach, and when he was elected, and then when the Silbach was refusing to let he and the other African Americans stay, at the hotel, and so there was some back and forth, and what they were like, so the white students who were there with them was like, well, if you're not going to let Raul stay, we're all going to leave, and they basically said, no, let's go ahead and have the conference, and he was elected the president. And then when I won, Raul was the person who gave me the gavel.
That's pretty cool.
So that was like really cool,
right.
For that to happen. But those type of experiences, and then I got an opportunity to intern in Washington, D.C. with Senator Wendell Ford, who was the majority whip at the time. And he's from Owensboro as well. And he always took a student from Owensboro to intern in his D.C. office. And so I got to do that in Washington, D.C. And it was, there's been, just throughout my life, there have been different experiences that have taken place that just reaffirmed this is where this was part of a path for me that I think God intended for me to move down and to do.
Well, let me say this. As long as I've known you, you've talked about Owensboro, the Big O. Tell me what it was like growing up in Owensboro.
So Owensboro is a great place to raise a family. And it's done a lot to shape who I am. There were a lot of people that when you take an opportunity to kind of look back, there were a lot of people who seeded into me and into my life. And, of course, it starts with my mom and dad. My dad is Samuel Tandy. He's a retired school teacher and football coach there in the Owensboro public school system. My mom is Rosie Tandy. She's originally from Hopkinsville or Cerulean, which is on the border of Christian and Trigg County. And then mom and dad met in college at Murray State University, and then after spending a couple years in Joliet, Illinois, where my dad played semi-pro football, and then where I was born, we moved back to Owensboro. And so then there were a lot of people who kind of seeded into me and helped me develop and grow. And so then everybody from my childhood pastor at my church was Reverend Dr. H.E. Floyd, and he was my kind of like an intellectual role model for me, because I mean he was an extremely intelligent man. He, along with the Jones family, you say that collectively about the Jones family there in Owensboro, but Amos Jones, who went on to graduate from Harvard Law School and now is a law professor in North Carolina Central, and that whole family was like smart beyond compare to anybody, but having conversations with them and Dr. Floyd kind of inspired me and it helped me to develop intellectual curiosity about issues and subject matters. And so they were great for me. And then all the mothers at the church, kind of seed into you and help you develop and learn how to speak in public. And I was a junior usher at the usher board, and so they would say you have to say the welcome, and so you learn how to do public speaking and
right.
Things like that. And then Roy Blanford was our family attorney, and so this is a white guy who was our family attorney, and he was my mentor that kind of got me going down the path of going into law school.
Okay.
And it happened because I wanted to be an attorney and I wanted to see how it was done. And so my dad and Roy had a conversation, and Roy wanted his sons to know what it was like to work on houses and whatnot, which my dad owned a lot of rental property there in Owensboro. And so one summer we did a son swap. And so I would intern in Roy's office as a runner and go with him to court and see how cases were argued before the judge, before district court judges and others, and things of that nature. And he would take my dad would take Roy's kids with him to go work on houses and things like that. And so all of those different people, and there's a host of others that I could probably go on down and mention as well, that kind of seeded into me and helped to shape me into being who I am today. And, you going back to your first question when you were asking about, well, what got me into politics? I mean, I can also talk about Dave Atkinson, who was he was mayor of Owensboro at the time, and it was a young guy. And that was another influence point on me too, where I could see this young, energetic leader of a city trying to push the city forward. And he pushed for merger even back then. So before I even came to Louisville, I knew about merger growing up there in Owensboro. Now the measure was defeated, but I could see it, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is where it's something that it could be done, and it may have made sense for Owensboro at the time. But Dave Atkinson and just watching him and seeing him lead the city of Owensboro was inspirational to me as well.
Well, I'll tell you this. I've done some research and talked to some people back in Owensboro. I'm not going to tell you who they are. I'll tell you at the very end. But, we know you here in Louisville as this politician, attorney. They still talk about your football playing days.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw that you made the Kentucky Tennessee All-Star game. So you're a very good football player. What made you decide to want to play football, and what went into your choices in going to college?
Well, playing football, I guess there wasn't a lot of choice to it. And then I remember growing up, I had a birthmark on my hand that was in the shape of a football. And then over time, it kind of faded away. But my dad was a football coach, played football, was always around it. Now, when I was a young kid, I never played Pop Warner. Typically you hear people talking about, oh, you're playing sports. You go play Pop Warner football when you turn 7 or something like that. I never did that. Just because at that time it was like, it just didn't interest me. And the other part about it too was you wanted to be to give yourself mentally and physically an opportunity to kind of get to the right place to where you can play a game like football, right, and understand the collisions and the things that are happening. So I didn't play football or organized football until I was in the 6th grade. But leading up to that, I always played baseball. and I always played some basketball or I played soccer. So I was always on the soccer field and playing year round. And those experiences were helpful to me as well because honestly, soccer was the place where I used to hate losing. And it would be so bad to where I would have to take Pepto-Bismol before games because I would get so torn up because in my head I'm running through all those different scenarios and I just hated to lose and I would work myself up. But then it was a year I had a soccer team that we were terrible and we lost every single game. And it was one of those things where that's where I learned how to lose, not to enjoy losing, but learning how to accept it and then to move on and not let it all consume you so that the fire doesn't go away to where you want to win and you want to give your best effort. But at the same time, it doesn't devastate you. To the point that where you can't function and you can't move on, So again, like I said, all of those experiences is kind of what helped to shape me into the person I am today, flaws and all.
So you decide to go to Vanderbilt, and you play football with my guy, Corey Harris.
Yeah.
Corey, Indianapolis guy. So, I knew Corey from back in the day. We grew up together, played against each other a lot in high school, and I knew he had gone to Vanderbilt. Tell me about your experiences there.
At Vandy.
And let me step back for a second. I know that you play football, and everyone knows that you play football at Vanderbilt as well. But talk about that, but I also want to talk about the other side of Vanderbilt, the things you did civically while you were there.
So it came down to when I was being recruited, there were other schools that were talking to me, but didn't really have any serious offers. So Michigan, was talking to me for a while. Princeton had talked to me, and actually they had talked about making a scholarship offer, but at the time I was like, that's a little bit too far away. I wanted to kind of stay close to home, and so it ended up my colleges came down to Western Kentucky or Vanderbilt, and with Western, my head coach of my football team in Owensboro was a guy named Gerald Pointer, and Gerald Pointer was my dad's coach. When he was in high school. So there was a period where Coach Pointer coached my dad and some others, retired, and then had come back. My sophomore year when I started playing varsity was his first year of being the head coach of our team. So he coached both of us. But he went to Western Kentucky. So miraculously, the only two schools that got in-school visits with me was Vanderbilt and Western. And this was when Western was being coached by Jack Harbaugh. They came after I'd had my in-house meeting with Vanderbilt, and Jerry DiNardo, who is the former IU coach and coached at LSU after Vandy, but Vandy was going to be his very first head coaching gig. And I was being recruited by the former coaching staff, which was Watson Brown, which is Mac Brown's brother, the coach now former coach at Texas, now he's at North Carolina. Right. And his brother Watson was the coach down there at Vandy, and they were recruiting me, and I was, loving it. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can see myself going to, into Vandy. And then he gets fired, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And so then it was in December, early December, they announced Coach DiNardo got hired, and he was coming off of winning the national championship at Colorado. With Eric Bieniemy and that whole crew, right? And so he gets hired. That night when they announced him being hired, he calls me and says, David, I'm the new coach at Vanderbilt, and I want to come and see you. And so 2 nights later, he comes to my house and visits with us at the house. And so those were the two that I was going with. So the conversation with Coach DiNardo went really well. And what did it for me and for my parents was when my dad asked Coach DiNardo this question, he said, Coach DiNardo, what are you going to do for my son if he decides to come to Vanderbilt? And Coach DiNardo said to my dad and to me, we're going to use your son to build our football program. it's up to your son to use us to get his education. And that has always stuck with me, not only just with what goes on with what I did with football, but even after I left and went on to University of Kentucky for law school, and then went on with all the other the law firms that I've been with, or my own private practice, is that, I recognize that some of these different engagements, relationships that we're in, it's about, it should be a mutually beneficial relationship. And it's up to, a lot of times people don't maximize the opportunity that's presented to them and get the most out of it for themselves, just like the organization or the other individual is going to get the most out of it for themselves, as well.
Let me ask you this before we go on to that. How involved were your parents with in your recruiting process?
Heavy.
And the reason why I say that is because I've spoken to a lot of people that it's his decision. I'm staying out of it. My parents were even like that. But I'm amazed at how many parents are so involved. I was involved with my kids and their recruiting process. So talk about that.
Yeah, my mom and dad, aside from who I was going to marry and from that point on, once I became an adult, but leading up to it, were always involved in those decisions, and we would all talk about it, and I would ask my mom's opinion, then I asked my dad's opinion, and then I would think about it, and then we would discuss it. And so they were heavily involved. Mom and dad were sitting in the living room with me. My brother was sitting there with me as well as I was going through the recruiting process, and so they all weighed in on it. And when you from just objectively, looking at it, Vanderbilt made the most sense. You're going to one of the best schools in the country, top 15 school in the country, hands down academically. You were going to, me coming from Owensboro, Kentucky, population 60,000 people, to Nashville, Tennessee, made all the sense in the world to me too, because I wanted to have an opportunity to where I could be around other African Americans who were smart and ambitious and had a lot of different interests, like I had. So I had the opportunity, and going to Vanderbilt gave me the best of all worlds. I mean, I could be at Vandy, this top-notch school, but then also have the benefit of interacting with students at Fisk and TSU and Meharry and American Bible College. And we would all go to church together because we all went to Mount Zion Baptist Church, which was right around the corner from Fisk. And Joseph Warren Walker III was the pastor who the fall semester, he was in divinity school stepping in the step show as one of my, he would later become one of my fraternity brothers of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Stepping in the step show, and then that spring he's the pastor of Mount Zion, and that church is just blown up ever since. Because him. So you got all of that was going on. But I will tell you, you brought up Corey, and my experience, and what sold Vanderbilt for me at the end was, so the night how it is when you're getting recruited. You go down there for a weekend, you get to see the campus and everything. And as a side note, David Snarton, Reverend David Snarton, was on my recruiting trip with me. Okay. And so it was David Snarton, it was Rob Reynolds, who was from here in Louisville. He went to Louisville Male High School. His brother Ed Reynolds was a linebacker for the University of Louisville.
Fraternity brother.
I understand that. Yeah, and so is Big Rob. So it's Big Rob. So all of us, we were on the recruiting trip together. And at the night, so this was Saturday night, and this was after we had gone out, but we all came into the room together. And so it was all of our hosts and everybody. And so Marcus Wilson, who was from here, went to Butler. He was a sophomore then, was a quarterback on the team. He got us all together, and we're talking about about the brotherhood on the team. And that's what sold me on Vandy. And so I made my decision that Sunday. Coach DiNardo had us in the office, like, we want to make you an offer. And I was like, well, let me think about it. He's like, you're not going anywhere else.
I want to make you an offer. I accept.
You're right. You're right. So that's how I got down there and everything. So, but that's why. Now, you asked me the question about what else did I do down there? And this is another reason what sold me on Vanderbilt, and particularly about with Coach DiNardo. I was very upfront with him about my desire to, potentially someday go into politics. And I wanted to, that's where I saw myself serving. And so he didn't dissuade me from doing that. A lot of times, especially then, coaches were about, no, you're here on a football scholarship. It's all about football.
Right.
And he wasn't like that. And so he kind of exhibited that in the way that he ran the program. Now, one of the things that we did was we would go off to Bell Buckle, Tennessee, to the Webb School, which is this little boarding school in the middle of nowhere. And that was where we would have our camp. And he would bunk us, offense, defense, black guy, white guy, together in our rooms to try to get us to know one another. And a lot of this was shaped off of his experience when he was at University of Colorado, and they would recruit students from South Central LA to come out there to play, and how it was difficult a lot of times for the black students to interact with all the other student body there at Colorado. And so they developed ways to kind of break down barriers on the team that then would spill over into the broader, University of Colorado.
I was going to say, is this Remember the Titans or something?
Yeah, well, but so some of the stuff that he got it from reading Bear Bryant's book, The Junction Boys, which is where you take them off into the wilderness and you go have your practice, and then you would practice them so hard that somebody's going to leave at the middle of the night. Well, yeah, that happened with us. He was hard charging in that way. But then at the same time, he was very caring in the sense of the way that he was conscious about wanting to break down barriers, black and white, work together, made it a point to come to the step shows of the Panhellenic Council and participate in that. And for me personally, made it a point to allow for me to, one, run for and be elected to the Honor Council there at campus, which is the body that oversees academic issues that may come up on campus, and then two, to then run and encourage me to run for president of the Black Student Alliance on campus, which I was one of the few, if not the first athlete to be president of that council, and then to really try to bring the black students and the black athletes together. Because a lot of times what would happen is the student athletes we'd be off at McGugin, which is our athletic complex on the other end of campus, and we never really interacted with just all the other students. But me being president, I kind of was a bridge between both of them, and so that kind of brought everybody together in that regard. And then, like I said, when I was a junior going into my senior year of college, he allowed for me to go to Washington, D.C. and intern in D.C. when most of the time the coaches wanted you to stay in Nashville, just lift weights, do your things there. He's like, nope, you go ahead and go on to D.C. and do that. And so I'll always be grateful for his encouragement of me to pursue the path that I went on.
So you graduate from Vanderbilt, and you decide to go to law school at a university in Lexington.
Right.
I think they wear blue. They wear blue there. And after you graduate from there, you decide that you're going to start practicing law.
Right.
What brought you to Louisville? You had choices. You could have stayed in that city in Lexington. Yeah. You could have gone back to Nashville. What brought you to Louisville, though? So
I knew that as far as my political career was concerned, I knew, particularly after interning in Washington, D.C. with Senator Ford. And here's the unique thing about what Senator Ford and interning with him was, across the hall from us was Teddy Kennedy's Senate office. And in Senator Kennedy's office, he would have 75 interns over the summer. So 25 interns per month would just roll through his office in a typical summer. Whereas with Senator Ford, we were 5 of us that were in his office. We stayed the whole time, and he actually paid us to be interns. So he gave us a stipend so we could live in D.C. and do everything. But then the other part that made it so cool was because there was only 5 of us, each one of us got an opportunity to sit down with him. He took an afternoon and was like, you can ask me whatever question you want and talk to me about anything. And we got the opportunity to do that. And so I went through and I talked to him about everything about, well, what does it mean to be a politician, and what about this, and what about the effect it has on your family, and well, what about taking this position or that position, or how did you get to that? And all of that kind of helped me say, yeah, this is what I think I'm meant to do. But it also showed me that I needed to come back to Kentucky to do it. Now, I didn't want to live back in Owensboro because I was like, okay, Owensboro's too small for me now. But I still was tied to Owensboro and wanted to help the folks that were there. And so going back to, again, Gerald Pointer, who was my former high school coach, at the time interviews were happening at my 3rd year of law school, he had left teaching, started working with one of his college teammates, Ron Sheffer, at the law firm of Sheffer, Hudson, and Kinney, and doing interviews. And so Coach Pointer saw me and was like, David, I want you to come interview for this firm. And so we interviewed, and they said, yeah, David, I think you'd be good to come work for us, because they had an office here in Louisville, over in the PNC Tower, but then they also had offices in Owensboro. So I had the best of both worlds. I could live in Louisville, but still go back to Owensboro to help, folks out there. And so that's what brought me to Louisville.
So you're in Louisville, and you're practicing law, and you decide to run for office. So tell me what went into that decision and why you decided to run for Metro Council instead of something else.
Well, okay, but before Metro Council, there was state rep.
Yeah, state rep.
And so that one, what went down with that was in 2002.
And I forgot about that.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. But go ahead.
Yeah, so in 2002, the district lines had gotten redrawn. And they were drawn in such a way to where, again, going back to Raul Cunningham, so it was Raul Cunningham, Darrell Owens, Leonard Gray.
Leonard Gray, I haven't heard that
Eleanor
name in a long
Jordan.
time. Yeah.
And Senator Georgia Davis Powers. So all of them I'm the young Turk, and then I think I had just gotten married at the time to Carolyn Tandy, and that was my wife. And so, but she knew all of these folks too, because she had been coming back and forth from D.C. to Louisville to work on campaigns and things of that nature. And so we're just married. We're sitting in my apartment over here on York Street, and the question became, okay, we felt like the 43rd district. Oh yeah, it was Tom Reiner's district at the time, so I think it was the 40.
I think it's 43rd.
43rd, yeah, district should have been. It was a majority minority district, and we're like, okay, there needs to be an African American representing that district. So then we're like, well, who we're going to get? This is like Senator Powers asking the question. So who we're going to get to run for that district? And everybody's looking around like, well, I don't know. And then we're sitting there and we're like, wait a minute. So what's the district line? And they look at the map and they're like, we're sitting in the middle of it. And this is you're in Carolyn's apartment. David, I think you need to run. And so that's why I ran in the primary in 2002 in that district. And so remember, this is the same time you had the Metro Council being formed, and those races were happening. So the 42nd, 43rd, yeah. So the 43rd district essentially was what turned out to be the 4th Metro Council District. It was basically the same thing, except you just extended out a little bit further when you got into Hubbard's Lane, Massey Avenue area. And so when I ran that race against, Tom Reiner, he was 18-year incumbent at the time, I'm this upstart running the race, and I had ended up having when I had Wendell Ford do a robocall for me into the district, that shook up the Democratic Party because they're like, wait a minute, who is this guy who can have a former majority whip in the Senate do a phone call for him? And so then the leadership at the time for the House Democrats all got riled up and behind Tom Reiner. So you had the Speaker of the House, Jody Richards, Greg Stumbo was Speaker Pro Tem, Larry Clark, Brereton Jones, all of them had started doing robocalls and letters and things like that on behalf of Tom Reiner. But when we ran the race, I wasn't attacking, disparaging him personally. I was like, here's the record. Let's talk about the issues. And that's how we ran the race. Well, long story short, I lost by 134 votes in that race. So darn near almost clipped them. And you fast forward to then 2005, and then that's when Willie Bright passes away.
Right.
And I remember one Sunday morning, Carolyn's we had left church and we're going to have lunch somewhere, and she's reading the paper and talking about Willie Bright passing away, and I was like, yeah, somebody needs to run for that seat. And then I started getting phone calls from people in the district saying, David, we saw you run that race for state rep a couple of years ago. We want you to represent us on the Metro Council. And so that essentially, after going through the process and everything like that, and then garnering support from different people, that's how I got on the Metro Council, was that way.
I know District 4 well, and you did an exceptional job being the Metro Council person in that district.
Thank you.
What do you think is your biggest accomplishment from then?
From there,
Yeah.
there are a couple of things that I point to that I feel really good about. One is toward the latter part of my career, we had a initiative called Ban the Box. And it was actually, I remember, she was then Councilwoman Scott, now State Representative Scott, had brought that forward, but I was one of the sponsors, and it actually came through my committee on economic development, which I was the chair of. And so we worked on it together, and we got to the point where, and this is where I think it was where it demonstrated how when you listen, when both sides are listening to each other, and you can figure out how to get to a yes on both sides. So we were pushing for, Democrats were pushing for Ban the Box, which said you cannot, for employers, you can't ask on your written part of your application, check yes or no, are you a convicted felon? Mm-hmm. Now, there are certain areas where you have to ask that up front. Like if it was a federal requirement, like a lot of times out at with UPS out at the airport, they have to ask it because it's FAA requirement. Mm-hmm. We got that. So we made that exception. But we were pushing for banning that question, banning that box being on the application, because a lot of times if you can get somebody in the room to where the interview gets to know them and can ask the question and then look somebody in the eye, they can understand, well, yeah, I'm checking the box, yes, because I was a former felon, but that was 30 years ago. Or, yeah, but I was, but it was something stupid. Or I got convicted for having a small amount of whatever, whereas somebody else would have got off scot-free for it because my daddy wasn't so-and-so, right? Mm-hmm. So it's to give people a chance to kind of explain who they are. Now, what we benefited from, too, you had some, this was a Democratic initiative, but you had some Republican opposition, but what we benefited from was you had Rand Paul at the time, who was actually, he and Cory Booker, senator from New Jersey, were advocating for some of these criminal justice reforms, and this was one of them. And so I distinctly remember we're on the floor of the of Metro Council, and Kelly Downer and I are going back and forth about this piece of legislation, and we're like debating it. And I'm like, yeah, this is why we need it, you know? And he was going back, well, nah, I got problems with this, I got problems with that. And I'm explaining away some of his concerns. And then we got to the point to where he asked the question, and I can't remember what it was exactly, but it's like, can we change this line to say this? And I distinctly remember saying to myself, stop, and say, yeah, I think we can. And we stopped the council meeting. We went out into the conference room across the hall from the chamber where we have our meetings, and we literally rewrote the sentence to where everybody could get on board with it, and we passed it unanimously. Mm-hmm. Whereas before, we were looking at it was going to be a straight party line vote. Right. You know, Democrats had the votes, but Republicans were. But we were able to work together, right, to get that done. So that legislation, that particular piece of legislation, is one of the things I'm proudest of. The other thing that I'm proud of is, and that story kind of alludes to it, is my ability to work across the aisle with Republicans and Democrats. The two times that I served as president of the council, both times were unanimous. Right. And it was Democrats and Republicans said, David, we need you to serve at this time. And then as a result of that, I was recognized on a national level as a member of the Aspen Institute's Rodale Fellowship, which is comprised of elected officials who, like a Michael Steele, former chairman of the Republican Party, and Tom Perez, who is the current chairman of the Democratic Party, and a whole host of others. Kamala Harris is actually one of our Rodale Fellows, as well. As well as Paul Ryan was a former Speaker of the House, was a Rodale Fellow as well. But that ability to work across the aisle and work with each other, that was an important part of my public service career. And then finally, the biggest thing was the arena. Right. And in particular with the arena is the policy that I helped develop and put forth on that project specifically, that then subsequently became the Fair Labor Standards Ordinance that was used for all the other projects thereafter, including the Omni, which said that for any project that the city was putting in substantial money, you had to have at least 5% of the contractors, meaning the people who own the company, and 5% of the workforce be women. And then 20% of the workforce and 20% of the contractors be minority or MBEs on a project. And a lot of that came from my inspiration being Maynard Jackson and seeing what he was able to do and transforming Atlanta into the city that we know it to be today as a booming economic development hub, particularly for the black middle class. That we could do the same thing here in Louisville if we were intentional about how we were spending our dollars and who we were doing business with. And that led to great success, and we created the construction pipeline program with the Urban League that allowed for us to not only hold the contractors, the majority contractors, feet to the fire, but also we held labor unions' feet to the fire too, to say, if y'all are saying you can't find people who are women or minorities to fit this bill in terms of who is going to work on the project, we'll create a pipeline of people for you to be able to select from and then go from there. Right. And there are a number of different success stories that came out of that. And so for me, that's probably my biggest accomplishment that I point to that I'm the most proud of.
Well, I know we're close to being out of time, but I can't leave this conversation without asking you a few things. Now, I do know that you ran for mayor in 2010, and I was so proud. I was so proud to see someone that I knew actually running for a position like that. You see where we are today, not only in the city, but in this country as well. We have a president who is our president. We have Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris running right now. We have a lot of different issues on the table. You're a politician. I saw in your Wikipedia page you're a retired politician, but once you're a politician, you never retire. You're a politician, and you're not only my friend, but you're a politician as well. You see things that need to be done. What do you think needs to be done now, and how do you think you can serve our community better and put in a better position?
You know, I don't know if it will be in the form of serving in a particular office.
And that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have, I'm not necessarily saying a public official, but you have a servant's heart. I know you're a man of faith, and you have a sense of duty of making things better and having people be the best representations of themselves, like I tell people a lot of times. What is your role here?
Well, I would say, I'll start off by saying this. They always, always say, if you ever want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans. So no matter what it is that I will do, I'll only do it after I've prayed about it and talk to God about it first, and then talk to Carolyn and the kids about it second, and then we make our decision collectively. Because that, in large part, was part of the reason why I knew it was time for me to leave too, because I had been praying for leadership and strength to lead the council at a particular time, and then in those conversations that I was having with God. And for some folks, this may sound crazy and a bunch of
doesn't sound crazy to me,
but,
not at all.
But for me in my faith journey, that's what led me. And it's sometimes, and a lot of times, that's why I say, a lot of times you think, we as human beings think we need to go one way, and God's telling us, no, I want you to go a different way. So from all of that, I learned I'm going to listen and I'm going to trust God first. That being said, whatever I do, the one thing that I know to be true is that I will always approach, whether it's in the public sector or whether it's in the private sector, I will always approach my job as one where, am I doing something that's going to help improve and better my community? And is it something that is going to benefit the people at large? You know, you always have to have an advocate for the people in no matter where you are, whether it's in the public sector, in terms of the policies that get enacted and enforced for the broader public, but then also in the private sector, do you have advocates who are looking out for not only your shareholders, but also looking out for the employees and the people who make the company as well? And are you intentional about who is it that we're promoting in the company, and does our company reflect our customer base and our and the people that we're looking to do business with? Because, like I said, I go back to what Coach DiNardo said. When he said, we're going to use you, David, to build our football program, it's up to your son to use us to get his education. The same thing is true in the marketplace. Companies are going to want your dollar in order for you to buy their product. But at the same time, the consumer is holding the company accountable for, are you selling me safe goods? Are you reflecting my and other consumers' needs and concerns when it comes to who's representing us in the boardroom, and who is your leadership, and what do you have in management, and who are you hiring from, and who are you doing business with in your supply chain? You know, all of those things go back to, are we doing right by people? And so whether it's doing something on the local, running for office here on the local level, or whether it's doing something statewide in other capacities, or if it's doing something in the private sector, that's what guides. I think is going to guide me, and which has in the past, and is going to continue to do that in the future.
Well, I'll tell you this. I have my thoughts, but we'll talk about those later. I tell you this. I appreciate your time. This is a conversation that could easily go on for a couple more hours, but unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being here today, because you could have been anywhere. I appreciate you coming here. Thank you for your leadership and your service in our community. But more than anything, I thank you for your friendship. You and I have known each other for a long time, and I can honestly say, and seriously say, that I would not be in the position I'm in right now without your help and your support. So, man, I thank you for everything, but I thank you for being you. You're not only my friend, you're my Masonic brother.
That's right.
We do things a lot together, and I look forward to not only being there for you as your friend, but whatever that next step may be, I promise you I want to be there with you too. As always, thank you again for joining us for A Matter of Perspective. Join us next time that we are available. Thank you very much.